like John says, my name is Charmaine McCaulay. I have a Canadian accent and I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet when I make a distinction that I'm not American. That's just for me. I don't think I'll ever get over that. I don't have to say that, but I like to say that. So there's a distinction. At the moment, I'm in the UK. I was trained in the UK and a psychotherapist and a body psychotherapist. And I think one of the main reasons that Lizzie and I, well, perhaps I would say me, I started this course was because I really wanted to understand what racism was and what internalized racism is. And I started to take a lot of courses face to face and online. And one of the things that I noticed for myself was a lot of times it was ticking the box. And even though the content was really good, I often felt that I personally couldn't come into it. My body was not involved. So I could tell you who D'Angelo was. I could tell you what race meant. I could even tell you what internalized racism was. I could tell you what white fragility was. What I couldn't do was tell you what the impact is on my body. And what I also couldn't do, I couldn't experience that. I couldn't experience those words. I couldn't experience those feelings in the time of the workshop. I'd have to go home and often feel, okay, so what was that about? So I decided to create a workshop where I would like to go to. And so my workshop and my seminar is about, during the course of the workshop, why I call it in real time, racial issues will come up. And I wanted to be able to explore that in real time. So what happens to me when I'm in a particular situation and I'm feeling the internalized racism? How do I process that? Where in my body does it actually hold tension? And so I started to figure out that I think a lot of other people were stuck in the same place. So I designed a course that was for both Black and brown and white folks. But what I decided was I separated the two out. It's almost the same course, but I would only have white folks in one group and Black and brown bodies in the other group. And again, I decided on that and personally how I would feel when I was in a mixed group. If I was in a mixed group, generally speaking, the whites would be there and they would have the floor. Their voices would be much louder than mine. And I could never find a space, no matter how strong it was, to actually articulate what I was feeling. And also what I noticed with the white folks, they would get stuck. They would feel awkward. They would feel shame. They didn't know what to say. Oftentimes they would freeze. And I thought, if they're in a space with only white folks, would they be able to articulate just what they're feeling? Would some of the shame and the awkwardness disappear? And then for the Black and brown folks, the same thing would happen. So in the Black and brown group, there's a lot more freedom to bring themselves, a lot more freedom to bring their internalized racism without being bombarded by the white gaze, where they would actually freeze and would feel almost annihilated. So that's the reason. So I've got two separate groups and it works incredibly well. And I recognize that in the white group, that I needed a really strong white voice with me to help me, that when I got attacked, and it happens every single time, some white person who they may say, well, I'm a nice white person, I didn't realize it, but their weapon of their whiteness was meant to take me out. And when I'm in that situation, I then call upon my really good friend, is Lizzie. So Lizzie, would you like to kind of talk about what happens for you and for me and why you're such a necessary part of what I'm doing?
Yes, because as we often say right at the beginning of each workshop, for Charmaine to be the only Black person in the room is simply dangerous for her. And a lot of what you can see people go, dangerous? That's a bit of a strong word. And then when the inevitable attack happens, then the penny starts to drop, because what happens every time is the white internal racist story starts to gravitate towards the white person who did the attack. Oh dear, how awful, and how can we help you? And Charmaine, the black body in the room, gets forgotten. When that is then pointed out, that's when the racism in real time really comes into play, because then, oh my God, how did we do that? Where in my system did that get activated without me even noticing? So having me there as a strong white voice, for one, to support Charmaine, we veer away this title of white ally, because there's a whole other implication in giving the white person that title. So I'm there to support Charmaine, one, because although she uses herself so beautifully and so strongly to help white people work through their racism, there's still going to be a certain amount of hurt that can happen. So when white body speaks to white body, any part of their racism that says, I don't believe the black person's story. No. And they try to rewrite it, don't they, Charmaine? That's not what I said, that's not what I mean. And it happens before our very eyes. But. So to have a white person supporting Charmaine, no, this is what happened, this is what was said. Let's stick to the reality. Let's bring it back to Charmaine, the black person's reality in the room. Then you see everyone going, oh yes, oh yeah, this is the reality here. And this is how it works. This is how the racism happens all the time. So we can't mix those groups up until white people have done the work where they, let's call it, people always say, oh, I'm screwing up again, I'm getting it wrong. So get it wrong many times. When you've done a certain amount of work, then we can think about how we bring you together, or just how are you going to work through racism in real time in your real life outside of the therapy room. Practice it here first.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and so I kind of want to give a real life example for those people who are listening and don't quite get. So what happens and I'll just speak to the white group first, and then I'll speak about the black and brown group. And the reason why I'm speaking to the white group first, it's not that I'm favoring them, it's because they got to do a lot more work, right? They got to do a shitload more work than the black and brown. We're good to go. So, the reason why I'm focusing on this is to the white folks who think that they don't have that much work to do. So part of what we're doing is bringing the external socialization, the external political realms, the external class system, the external economic factions right into the room, right? And it's intersectionality at its best. We're also bringing in patriarchy. We're bringing in gender differences. And I have decided, this is the way I'm doing, that race in a way is the umbrella for them all, right? And I'm talking specifically about skin tone, because I know there's lots of different ways we can be racist, but I always say that we're talking about skin tone difference. So I'm not talking about anything else. Yeah, because I really want to make that clear, because somebody says, well, why aren't you talking about this kind of racism? Why are you talking about that? I said, because it's skin tone. And that's because that's what I've chosen to focus on. So within the room, what can happen, and it happened not too long ago, very interesting. There was one person in the room, and we were talking about the particular past, and they were bringing up their past and where they lived. And I had said something about, well, what happened to this girlfriend that you had, for example? And I said, could you consider this? Now, the other people in the room who are white, they considered, and then they asked this person more questions, more personal questions. And the person eventually got really upset. But the person got upset with me and said, I can hear everybody else's criticism, and it's very constructive, but your criticism is not constructive, when actually I didn't criticize at all, right? So think about that. I didn't actually criticize, but in this person's way of holding information, I suddenly became the bad person. Though I never said that. I said, well, can you think about this? But in that person's world, we're talking about white male privilege. The fact that a Black woman is sitting in the room and simply asking a question was so overwhelming to this person's system, he could not fathom nor tolerate. It was almost like a how dare you ask me to consider. And even when, I said to the group, so what is everybody hearing? And even those people who actually criticized this particular person, that person could not hear it. I mean, it was extraordinary. But that's what happens quite often in group settings. And what was even more challenging is that this person was visibly angry with me, sat up and directed their gaze of full-on anger and rage. And it was something that if you're in the room, everybody felt it. So it wasn't like I was trying to be, oh, I'm not really sure. It was there in the room and everybody was holding it, very palpable. But what happened was the group who was white moved their attention to this white person and gave them all the attention in somewhat soothing this person, calming the person. And I, the victim, the Black woman, was left. And so I said to the group, and this is why I call it racism in real time. I said, okay, group, what do you think happened? Like, they were startled. And I said, how come not one of you white people, not one of you, asked me how I was? So they were shocked because it never occurred to them in their psyche, in their bodies, that there was anything wrong and that I could have been hurt. I was hurt, that they could have checked in with me. So this is what I'm saying about a real learning moment in its visceral, really visceral, what was happening to everybody. And they were talking about, yeah, like my back is sore. I've lost my voice. I can't see. I'm feeling dissociated. And so as much as this goes on all the time, this is the first time I think everybody in the room to actually deal with it as it is actually happening. So we went around and said, so what was it that prevented you from seeing me and to making me important to your world? Now, there's lots of buildup before we even get that. That's not the first thing that happened. In fact, this happened on the second day. But it's that kind of appreciation that you kind of, if you're white, you kind of wake up to really what happens in the room quite often. But because you're white, you don't have to ever pay attention to it. You're oblivious. You go home. And this happens often to Black and white bodies when they're in the same room. The Black body is not supposed to exist in that room. That's the first thing. And then you get a Black woman, strong, powerful, not attacking, but suggesting, God forbid if I attacked, I would have been thrown out and burnt. But God forbid. And so that is not the norm. So most white bodies are not accustomed to having any Black person call them out. So we're talking about these kinds of situations. And, eventually some of them said, well, I was going to say something. I said, but you didn't. How come you didn't? Someone said, well, it was on the tip of my tongue. I go, but you didn't. And it's the didn't bit. Now, everyone in the room has to sit with, work through, process, and really come to some kind of definitive sense. I didn't because I didn't see you. I didn't because you're not worthy to me. I didn't because you don't count as a presence. And you watch how now the white group really has to come to terms with what they believe is their niceness. Now, nice people don't ever do that, right? Nice people see us all. But we recognize when racism and there's a racial wound, It has nothing to do about being a nice person or a bad person. What we watched was all these nice people did that to me.
When you describe it like that, it's just so clear, Charmaine. Then to be confronted with what has just come from us automatically, that's like so deep in the organism. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's at that level. So we take it from the meta, we take it from here.
Yeah.
And there's a process that we go through. It's not, we don't start there. There's a process that by the time something like this happens, they're already sensing their bodies. They're already sensing the tension, the constriction, the wanting to run away, the wanting to hide their gaze, their loss of voice. So for me, I present, okay, so what does the loss of voice represent for you? What is that? What is this churning? And so what happens to them as they start to rely on their body for the information, because if you rely on your head, the information from your head is very different sometimes than what's here. And so the whole process is that the head and the body to be in union, that there's not a separation. Because remember, racism is about separating, right? That's the main function of racism, is to separate people out. But more importantly, it's to separate your body, your heart from your head. Because if you live in your head, racism thrives. And it loves, what do you call it? Definitions. Because definitions, we can stay proudly up here. But if you allow it to come in your body, and once you sit there, there's something about racism then loses its potency. But as white folks, it's kind of scary to come into your body in that kind of way. It's particularly in the British society, it's taboo. Let's just live up here and say, yes, I'm sorry, and I'm a nice person. And let's just nod. Not too many nods, but just.
Yes. Well, and this is what you're saying that can so easily happen in training, that we can stay in that cognitive place and actually nothing has changed. And it's just such a profound description of that group where everybody is confronted with how they are. And well, then there's a real choice. There's a real choice to engage. Yeah. Or not, like, I guess. But yeah.
Sorry.
And there's also the we really do bring in the risk. And we never talk about that in therapy groups. We don't talk about in business situation. But every choice that we make, there's a risk, whether we like it or not. And it's very quixotic. We've made a risk. Do I do A, B, C, or D? And within the racial context, there is, and we got them to explore, what is the risk if you come and you align with me? What is the risk if you don't? And what is lost? And I often say that's a very personal decision. I cannot tell you what that is. So for the first time, I think for whites, they start to actually think, yeah, what are the risks that I need to take or to suffer from? And what do I lose or gain by doing A, B, C, or D? And again, we don't often put it that way, but we're constantly making those incredible choices. And how do we show up? And how do we all step in the racial wound together? And do we want to?
Yeah. The time that we've had together has just gone so incredibly fast.
Oh my God.
We're just about out of time. I mean, of course, this is the beginning of a huge conversation, isn't it? And that's what you're hosting and facilitating on the course that you run. We're planning to do a little taster for that at online events so that colleagues can come and get a feel for that experience, and then hopefully go on to, or maybe even skip right past the workshop and get straight into your course after listening to this conversation. I wonder how you might want to use the last 5 minutes or so that we've got, do you want to say a little bit more about the structure of the course in terms of the commitment for people, or there might be something very different you want to say, or
did you want to say anything, Lizzie? Because I think you wanted to say something and I kind of cut you off. Did you want to sort of bring that in? What?
That's fine. You're in a beautiful flow there. I was just, it looked like, well, two things. One, in a way, you had a little bit of a demonstration of how Charmaine works on the course, because she painted the picture for you of something that actually happened, and then went into a little bit of teaching, an explanation of how this works, and then how we then sort of move through it, how we then process it. And then I'll leave you to talk about the structure, you know, what else you do with it. Mm-hmm. But I just sort of wanted to say in that moment that it looked like, as Charmaine was painting the picture, that you, John, were having a physical response already to it, that the way Charmaine was talking and what she was explaining, that somehow something dropped from here and straight into your body. And that's kind of it. That's the work.
That's the experience. Yes. And I think that's exactly right. I've begun to have the experience just being in that description that you made, Charmaine.
Your whiteness was spoken to.
Yes, yes.
So it's a brilliant course, even if I say so for myself. And that's only because the amazing feedback has actually overwhelmed me. When I designed the course, I knew what I wanted. I wasn't sure if other people would relate to it, and they related it far beyond my imagination. And when you hear people will actually say, and these are older people, not 25 millennials, who would say, that was the most transformative course that I have ever been on. And that's with whether you take it for 2 days, or if you do the 10-week course. I suggest doing the 10-week one, because it really gives you time to process. You go away, you come back, you go away and you come back. And it really does build something quite strong. And as one person said on our last course, I can never go back again. And I think that is the greatest testimony that I've ever heard. I will not go back to how I was before.
Yeah, yeah. And I can already feel something of that as you're spotting, Lizzie, and in hearing about the experience that you described, Charmaine. So I think you make it irresistible, really. I think that is the experience. Hopefully people will come and join us for the workshop.
Yes.
Come and do the 2 days, come and do the full course with you both. It's just absolutely essential work. I mean, it's work that we cannot not be doing. It's just, yeah, absolutely essential.
And I want to say that if it hasn't come across, I'm really, really passionate and really dedicated to this work. And my whole sense of being is, you know, I really do try to do it with a deep sense of compassion and love in my heart. And everyone in the room really does feel it on the last day, just how much love is in the room and how important. I think that is the most essential ingredient, is the capacity to open our hearts as wide and as big as we can.
I would say that is something so particular to you, Charmaine. Charmaine has this capacity to not let you off the hook, to challenge you, but there's always compassion underneath it. It's painful, it's messy, it's excruciating sometimes, huh?
Oh, definitely.
And yet there is always the compassion underneath, because it's something to move through, not to get stuck in. And Charmaine is very skillful at helping people move through without denying or avoiding along the way.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Well, and thank you both for taking the time, spending a little bit of time with me. I'm just so touched by everything that you've both said. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much for this time. And looking forward to what emerges next together. Yeah, and
Well,
for those of you who have been watching this discussion, we will see you soon. We'll see you soon. Charmaine, I think you were just going to say something before we finish.
I was going to take and say thank you, John, for giving us, Lizzie and I, this space to really talk about something that we're both very committed to. And I really appreciate how I feel like you're with us. And you didn't feel like a stranger asking me questions. So I would want to say how you too brought your beautiful self into the room with us too. So I want to say a deep thank you and a gratitude. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, John.
I echo that.
Thank you. It feels like we've made that very quick connection. I love that. And it feels so hopeful for the work, I think. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We'll see everybody soon in the workshop and in the course, I'm sure.
Yes.
Bye for now, Charmaine. Bye, Lizzie.
Bye, John.